This is the last lecture for test number 2, and we're talking about Northern European art, or Hiberno Saxon art. So Germanic tribes, we had talked about this before, but one of the things they did that we didn't talk about is they invaded the British Isles, the Angles and the Saxons in the 5th century, and that's where we get that term Anglo-Saxon for British people. And then in Gaul, the tribe was called the Franks, and that's the source of the name France. So not as influenced by Greek, Roman, and Muslim culture as the rest of Europe. So they developed a lot of ideas independently, but we'll see how some of the formal things they're doing, so some of the patterns and colors they're using and mediums that they're using will contribute to the art we'll look at later, but we'll also see how Islamic art and some of the other artistic traditions are going to contribute as well. So the first thing we're looking at is the Sutton Hoo purse cover. And this is from about 625 or so. And it was found in a ship burial. So like if you've seen in movies where they have those like Viking ship burials, you've probably seen it, where they take the ship and they set it on fire and they put it down the river or something like that. And that's all great and such. But if you're going to put all these expensive items like we're seeing here on that ship, then there's going to be people waiting down the river to rob the ship. So instead of doing that sort of thing, they would actually bury the ships in the ground. And that's what this is. So the particular medium that this is, it's metalwork, and that's like the general idea, but it's cloisonné, a multicolored surface made by pouring enamels. You can see those here. And the compartments outlined by bent wire fillets or strips. That's what these things are. And what would be a good idea is kind of like take a look at this thing on your own, pause the video, and try to figure out what's going on. Like, what can you recognize, which might be kind of tricky, and think about what kind of qualities this particular piece of art has. So, take a little bit of time, pause the video, and try to do that. And then start the video up again, and I'll tell you what previous classes usually see in this. One of the first things they notice is there's something going on here. Sometimes people see this as one figure with giant shoulders. Sometimes they see these two figures as dogs. They could be wolves, and then see a separate human figure in here. And then here, sometimes people will see like elephants or other strange animals. But if you look closely, they're both birds. So we have a bird of prey here with the curved beak. And then we have a bird that's maybe like a partridge or a pheasant or a chicken or something along those lines. So not a bird of prey. The other thing people will notice are these patterns. They're called interlace patterns. And the last thing is the incredible symmetry of it. You can draw a line right down the middle and fold it in half, and you'll get the exact same thing on both sides. And the very last thing that people usually get to is that this is abstracted. It's not something where they're trying to make these animals look natural, like we can't even identify them. There's certain conventions, and people would be able to identify these animals based on the conventions at the time, but they're not realistic. And all of these qualities we're going to see, and this is most likely pre-Christian, before the people in this area converted to Christianity, but we're going to see this make its way into Christian art, all of these qualities, and even into other mediums like two-dimensional arts. So this is a gold belt buckle, which is awesome. If you wanted to bribe a professor to get a good grade, maybe this would be something. I would wear it in class. So what we see in it is this interlace pattern, which is very, very complex, but you can follow it along. It's partially three-dimensional, so it's almost like these snakes are real, and you can kind of follow from the head all the way to the tail. And then we have more riding stakes in here. It could be references to Odin, which is one of the gods in Norse mythology, and in Germanic mythology. If you've been watching like those superhero movies, you probably get a little bit of this Norse mythology in there. And then we have more interlaced patterns going on here. But the same thing it would seem previously. There's conventions like, these snakes don't look particularly realistic, and we have a very, very symmetrical piece. This is a helmet. As you can see, there's not a whole lot that has survived from the ship burial. And it's an iron helmet covered with decorative panels of tin bronze. So the form of the helmet is similar to what people would actually use if they were in battle. But that's not what this helmet is for. It is a commemorative type of helmet. So you wouldn't use this in battle. It's way too fancy and wouldn't be particularly useful. It was originally crushed in the ship burial. So when archaeologists dug it up, they did some reproductions of it. And what we see in it is warriors battling and interlacing animal motifs. So like we had seen in the other art we looked at so far. There's a gilt bronze boar's head on the eyebrows. So we see these animal figures in it as well. And this great mustache made with the animal figures going along this part of the helmet. This is it from the side. And again, the form, like the shape of the helmet, it would be similar to a battle helmet, but this is never meant to be used in battle. So the Vikings, they were Scandinavian warriors. So the modern countries of Sweden and Denmark and Norway. And they were pagans. And remember, pagans just means it's what Christians call people who believed in multiple gods. So they had a large pantheon of gods. And again, their pantheon of gods has made its way into pop culture. So Thor is one of the most common ones. And they were influenced in these particular forms partially by what we've already seen the other Germanic tribes were doing, these interlaced patterns, but also by the Scythians. So this is a lion head finial from Russia. The Scythians were a tribe that was kind of similar to some of the Germanic tribes in that they weren't quite as settled down, and they tended to have to kind of like try to expand through conquest or raiding and things like that. So they had a lot of portable items like the ones we were looking at before. So that's like what this animal head is. So this is the Roic stone, and I don't usually try to pronounce Swedish words in Sweden, and it's from the early 9th century. And what it shows are runes. And runes are kind of similar to hieroglyphics that we looked at in Egypt. It's not an everyday communication type of written language. It's not something that everyone would be able to use. Like the vast majority of people would have no idea on how to write these things. And it was writing that was used by Vikings and Germanic tribes, mostly for spiritual purposes. So that's what we're seeing here. This one is a memorial of Vikings, King Theodoric the Great, and his dead son. And again, how to pronounce Scandinavian words? I don't usually do it. So this type of carving on stones with runes was pretty common. And we see it make its way into the Christian art that is made. So the Scandinavians were some of the last Europeans to convert to Christianity. And this is Harold Bluetooth's runestone. That name should sound kind of familiar to you. The Denmark converts to Christianity in 965. And what you'll notice is that Christianity is like really useful for people that want to conquer a lot of different cultures or just ease over conflict between different cultures because it has this idea of universal love and it's evangelical. So a lot of leaders see Christianity as kind of a tool that they can use to either consolidate their power or at least like stop people from warring with each other. So Harald Bluetooth kind of has both strategies going on. He was a king of the Danes, and he converted to Christianity in the hope to kind of unite all of these warring tribes of Scandinavians. So when you see the stone here without the paint, it's pretty hard to tell what's going on. So it's easier if we look at a painted reproduction. So on this side, we have Jesus, but we have these interlaced patterns and abstracted type of animals, just like we had seen in the pre-Christian work. And one thing I should mention is that Bluetooth, it sounds kind of gross. It comes from this Scandinavian word. Again, I'm not going to pronounce it because I don't know how, which means dark hair. So people in other languages heard this word and didn't really understand, so they said Bluetooth. But it doesn't have anything with like some kind of awful dentistry or something like that. This particular stone is the earliest surviving Scandinavian Christ. So there might have been ones before this, but this is the only one this is the earliest one we know of. And there's some runes down here. If we go to the other side of the stone, we can see some things that are left over from the metalwork. So even though this is carved into a stone, it looks like cloisonné. Like you don't need to have this form and then this form in the inside as if these are panels and then bent wire fillets here. But it kind of shows you the power of imagery again, even though we're going across mediums, and this isn't a necessity for this particular medium. That's what the artists are used to doing. So that's what they do. We have these interlaced snake forms, which before was a reference to Odin, but it's not that reference nowadays. And then this one's a lion, even though you're probably seeing it and like, wow, that doesn't look much like a lion. But again, these conventions that we're looking at. So the runes underneath say all in Norway. And then on the other side, it says, and made the Danes Christian. So talking about the unifying power of Christianity. And you may notice, like when you pick up your phone or other types of electronic devices you have, the Bluetooth symbol comes from the runes referring to Bluetooth's name. So these two symbols are put together and it makes the Bluetooth symbol. So if you've ever seen this symbol before or this icon and thought, why does it look this way? The reason why is because the Bluetooth kind of standard was created by Scandinavians, and they were frustrated that if they wanted to have different devices communicate, that there was no easy way to do that. Every brand had their own way of communicating, and you couldn't communicate across other brands, which was annoying because then you'd have to buy everything from the same brand. So they created this, and they basically made it available to people and never really got paid for it. But that was their intention. They didn't really care about it. And just like Bluetooth is kind of seen to unite all of these warring factions, the Bluetooth standard does the same thing as far as the warring factions of brands for electronic products. So that's where that comes from. So if you move on to Hiberno Saxon art, we're going to see some of these same forms and patterns, but that are coming from originally from metalwork, but used in not only stone, but also we'll see other two-dimensional works. So this is the most famous Hiberno Saxon form. It's called a Celtic cross. And usually these crosses mark sacred places and roads. Nowadays, they're obviously used for graves and such. So how did the British Isles become Christian? Well, firstly, it was Ireland and St. Patrick, who is an historical figure, but most of the stories about him are legendary. He introduced Christianity into Ireland. So that's why in March, everyone gets wasted because they're celebrating the Irish becoming Christian. So I don't know what St. Patrick would think about how his holiday ends up turning out, but I don't know. People like to have fun, so I'm not going to judge. So center of Christian learning in the early Middle Ages. So Christianity brings with it a monks and nuns and the scholarship that goes along with that. So that's why you see in the like scholarly work was being done by monks and nuns at this time. So that's why it becomes a center of Christian learning. So Hibernia is what the Romans refer to this area. It just means Ireland. It's the same as modern day Ireland. So this cross form has become incredibly flexible and popular through time. So the Scottish love it. You can see it right here. There's these wooden versions of it that are kind of abstracted that I think are pretty cool. Celtic cross right here, which is actually like an early kind of death metal band, and their album Hickville. You can see they're using this kind of like modernist type of Celtic cross. And then people get tattoos of it. We have the interlace. And this is the kind of the other way that sometimes people do this tattoo. Very abstracted. And then the last one, this t-shirt, speaking of metal, with the dragon. So the Celtic cross has been kind of like this shorthand for recalling a time, where there were kings and knights or even dragons. So it's been a very lasting image, like far beyond like its original intent. And even these cute little eggs. So all of this comes together into one of the most characteristic Christian art forms during this time, and that's illuminated manuscripts. And what illuminated manuscript means is an illustrated book. So unlike the Islamic world, where everybody was encouraged to learn how to read, and books were mass produced so that as many people could read them as possible, in the Christian world, the people that learned how to read were elites and monks and nuns. And everybody else was kind of left out of it. So when you had books, they were produced for those people, and they weren't produced for a general audience. The other thing is that there wasn't really a way to mass produce these books, so they were handmade. And some of these books would be the lifetime work of one monk or one nun or a group of them. So they're produced by monks in Irish and British monasteries. And we can see that all the qualities that originally came from metalwork are appearing again. Like, it's not necessary to have these forms in a literal sense, like you would in metalwork, to hold things together. But it shows the power of the form. Artists are just like modifying what they'd seen before. And same thing with the interlace and symmetry that we had seen in the pre-Christian works. So interlace, symmetry, animal forms from stone carving and metalwork. So each gospel would have a cover page. And nowadays, if you buy a Christian Bible that has the Old Testament and New Testament, you can buy it in one book. It has like super thin pages, but you can do that. As you can see, these books are illuminated on vellum. And vellum is made from animal skin. So as a result, the pages are very thick, and it's not possible to, well, it's technically possible to make an entire Bible, but nobody really did it. The closest people came to is making a New Testament, so just the Gospels and the story of Christ's followers. And that thing weighed like 250 pounds. So this isn't something that people usually did. Instead, they would usually have just one book and illuminate that. So each of them had a cover page, and each of the gospel writers had symbols. So the symbols change depending on who's doing it, but we'll talk about that later on. In this case, the symbol for John, who is one of the gospel writers, this is the lion symbol. When we get in close, we can see how similar it is to the metalwork that we had looked at from Sutton Hoo. So it's almost like they have these enamel panels and the bent wire fillet still there, even though it's not necessary. It's two-dimensional. It doesn't have to be literally held together. We have the patterning that's on the inside. And even when you look at the face, it shows something that is from metalwork, and that's stippling, which you would do by making tiny dents in the metal. But it survives in 2 dimensions. Again, this kind of shows you how changing art forms is difficult. You can apply new ideas to it. That's much easier. But it does make for interesting pictures. And then when we look at the interlace patterns from the same page, again, it's like symmetry and complexity. And even though it's not 3-dimensional, you can follow the different forms as if it was 3-dimensional, just like we saw in the belt from Sutton Hoo, the belt buckle, that is. So this develops over time. And then I should mention in this class, I'm showing you the fanciest illuminated manuscripts. Not all of them look this good. This one is the Tunk Crucifixerid XPI from the Book of Kells. That's one of the most famous illuminated manuscripts. So you can see how this is incredibly fancy. It has some words. They're all in Latin. And I should mention that, again, like monks and nuns and elite people would learn how to speak and read Latin. Regular people wouldn't know any of this at all. And all the church services would be in Latin as well. So regular people, when they went to church, they wouldn't understand a word that was being said except during the homily, which is when the priest would talk to everybody in their own language. So already we're seeing a bunch of forms we had seen before. There's some interlace here, these abstracted animals. We're going to be able to get in close here and follow all these things. A lot of times when you see these in a class, you might imagine that these are huge, especially like I show it on this huge projector on the screen. But you can see that it's relatively small, 9.5 by 13 inches. So about the size of like your average college textbook. But the detail is amazing. So this particular manuscript had been recently cleaned, and I'll put the link in the description of this video for this gallery of medieval scriptorium, where you can see high resolution images of these clean ones. So the images and colors were super bright. So the monks that are creating this, they try to have fun with it. They want to make something that looks beautiful to them. And if we kind of get a little bit close, we can see some of the detail. So what we're looking at is only a spot that's maybe 1 inch by 2 inches. And you can see how much detail is in it. And you might imagine when someone's doing something like this, that it would be almost impossible to do it without a magnifying glass. But magnifying glasses weren't something that was available at this time. So probably how these artists did it is similar to what my brother had described when he had painted miniatures. These are these like figures that are made out of pewter, and people paint them. A lot of people who paint them, and they're really small. They're like maybe 1 inch high, but they have a lot of detail. And a lot of people that paint them do use magnifying glasses, but my brother never did. And I asked him how he did it, and he said, before he was about to paint, he would just like stare very closely at these tiny little figures. And after like 10, 20 minutes or so, it would seem to get bigger in his eye. And then he was able to paint it and get all this detail. And the detail for someone like me observing it, I couldn't even see it until I put a magnifying glass in front of it. So that's probably similar to what the artist would do here. They would just kind of study it for a while until it seemed to get bigger, and then they were able to get these incredible details. So you can see with the interlace, you can follow it again. This like serpent-like form ends in the feet here, and you follow all around. All of these little dots, again, it's from metalwork. It's like stippling from metalwork. And lots of kind of cool details. You can see how this like snake human-like figure is kind of like spitting out this yellow stippling out of his nose. And again, you get in closer and closer, and we're talking about, this is like 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. but incredible detail within that. So this one from the Book of Kells, again, the detail is incredible. It's almost microscopic. And you probably are seeing some similarities in the way that the detail is layered upon layered, and it seems very mathematical. You're probably seeing the influence from Islamic art, and that would be true. In a lot of archaeological digs of Scandinavian sites and sites in the British Isles, we find Islamic symbols and things that are from the Islamic world. So they were certainly exposed to the art and thought this was really cool and integrate it into their own art styles. Again, we get in very close and we see some like somewhat humorous or gruesome, depending on how you look at it, forms. So this person's head and it comes around. Again, these like highly mathematical patterns, influenced both by the pre-Christian Hiberno Saxon work and probably by Islamic art as well. More stippling. And then some like little cute scenes. Sometimes you'll see like, jokes, but in this one, we can see rats and bunnies. So, they like to put all kinds of little Easter eggs into everything. Another page is called a carpet page, again, for obvious reasons. And, if you're seeing some similarities from what we saw in Iran and Persian carpets, like, again, not a coincidence, those were exported to the areas that we're looking at, Scandinavia and the British Isles. So, elite people in those areas would have owned some of those Persian rugs. And you see that in these illuminated manuscripts. Again, you get in closer and it's microscopic details.